In a rare display of unified messaging, both Russia and Turkey have addressed the newly elected U.S. President, Donald Trump, urging a re-examination of Washington's policies in the Middle East. This coordinated diplomatic outreach underscores the urgency felt by both Moscow and Ankara, as they seek to shift the U.S. approach to complex regional issues where American alliances and policies have had far-reaching consequences. The appeals from Russian President Vladimir Putin's special envoy and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan reflect a growing consensus between these two nations on the need for a fundamental recalibration of the U.S. role in the Middle East, specifically where it concerns long-standing alliances and emerging geopolitical challenges. Putin's special envoy conveyed a message urging Trump to take a different approach to regional conflicts. According to this high-ranking Russian official, the current U.S. strategy, particularly its unreserved support for Israel, has not only failed to resolve these conflicts but may have also entrenched them further. Moscow's position hints at an alternative path, one that might consider Russia's own involvement in the region, especially in Syria, and that of other players who feel sidelined by U.S. policies. By calling for a shift, Russia is signaling its readiness to engage with the United States in a new capacity, one that emphasizes dialogue and multilateral cooperation over the unilateral decision-making that has often characterized U.S. policy in the Middle East. The Russian envoy's words reflect a long-standing Russian viewpoint that the U.S.'s close alignment with Israel, without adequate consideration of other regional concerns, has become a barrier to meaningful diplomatic progress. As a key ally of the Syrian government and a close partner to Iran, Russia perceives the U.S. approach as one that often overlooks the legitimate security concerns of other regional actors. Moscow's message to Trump is not just a call for change but a reminder of Russia's growing role and influence across the region, particularly in areas where Western influence has waned. Erdogan's message to Trump echoes these concerns, albeit with a distinct Turkish perspective. Turkey, a NATO member with its own deep-seated regional interests, has frequently found itself at odds with U.S. policy in recent years, especially on issues related to Syria and the treatment of Kurdish militias. Erdogan's outreach reflects his desire for a U.S. policy shift that takes Turkey's security priorities seriously, particularly those relating to Kurdish groups in Syria that Ankara views as existential threats. Erdogan urged Trump to consider a more balanced NATO strategy, one that respects Turkey's sovereignty and aligns more closely with Ankara's regional goals. For Turkey, this appeal to Trump is not just about security but about redefining its role within NATO. By calling on Trump to reconsider NATO's presence in the Middle East, Erdogan is aiming to steer the alliance towards a posture that is less about projecting Western power and more about addressing specific security challenges that Turkey faces. This stance underscores Turkey's evolving view of itself as a regional leader, one that can engage in bilateral agreements and pursue its own security goals even as it remains a NATO ally. Erdogan's message is thus a reflection of Turkey's unique position, straddling both Western alliances and its increasingly autonomous foreign policy vision. This alignment of Russian and Turkish messaging is significant. Although Russia and Turkey have historically had competing interests, they have recently found common ground in their mutual dissatisfaction with certain U.S. policies. Both countries have established a complex relationship, particularly in Syria, where they often coordinate military and diplomatic strategies despite occasional conflicts. This joint outreach to Trump highlights their shared interest in reducing American influence in the Middle East, thereby opening space for greater regional autonomy and multipolar cooperation. Russia and Turkey's joint messaging also comes against a backdrop of multiple regional crises that threaten to spiral into broader conflicts. The war in Syria, ongoing hostilities between Israel and Palestine, and rising tensions involving Iran have collectively created a volatile environment. Both Moscow and Ankara perceive these crises as opportunities to assert themselves as stabilizing forces, stepping in where they believe the U.S. approach has failed to deliver sustainable solutions. By encouraging Trump to adopt a more flexible and inclusive strategy, they are signaling their readiness to engage constructively while promoting a vision of the Middle East that is less dominated by Western interests. This coordinated diplomatic push also suggests that Russia and Turkey see Trump as a potentially willing partner in a renewed dialogue about the Middle East. The new administration presents an opening for both nations to advocate for a less interventionist, more regionally focused approach to U.S. foreign policy. Russia's message highlights the need for a reset that balances U.S. commitments to allies with a recognition of other players' security concerns, while Turkey's outreach emphasizes the importance of revisiting NATO's approach to reflect the changing dynamics of the region. Together, these calls reflect an emerging consensus that the US cannot unilaterally dictate the terms of Middle Eastern security and that a new framework may be required. The messages from Russia and Turkey reflect a broader geopolitical trend towards multipolarity in the Middle East, where traditional power structures are being challenged by new alliances and shifting priorities. For Russia, this means continuing to assert its influence through strategic partnerships and military involvement, as seen in Syria. For Turkey, it involves a more independent foreign policy that seeks to balance its NATO commitments with regional ambitions. This alignment on Middle Eastern policy points to a convergence of interests, even as both nations pursue their own distinct goals. The Turkish and Russian messages also point to an opportunity for Trump's administration to engage in diplomacy that acknowledges the complex interplay of regional powers. Unlike previous administrations that have often emphasized military solutions, Trump's presidency might allow for a more negotiated approach, where the US acts as a balancing force rather than an interventionist power. This approach would require recalibrating American foreign policy to include Russia's and Turkey's perspectives, thereby fostering a multipolar balance that could reduce the frequency of proxy conflicts. Russia and Turkey's appeals to Trump are not only a reflection of their own interests but also a diplomatic overture that emphasizes cooperation over confrontation. If Trump's administration is receptive to these messages, it could herald a period of recalibration in the Middle East, where regional players are given greater agency in resolving conflicts. This could lead to a framework where the US, Russia, and Turkey work alongside other nations to address the underlying causes of instability in the region, rather than pursuing isolated strategies that only address symptoms. For Trump, responding to these overtures presents both an opportunity and a challenge. On the one hand, engaging with Russia and Turkey on these terms could help de-escalate tensions and establish the US as a diplomatic force rather than a military one. On the other hand, realigning America's approach would require careful navigation of its existing alliances, especially with Israel, whose security concerns have traditionally been a cornerstone of US Middle Eastern policy. Balancing these interests will be critical if Trump's administration seeks to make a lasting impact in the region. Ultimately, the calls from Russia and Turkey highlight the potential for a new era in Middle Eastern diplomacy, one that prioritizes regional solutions and multilateral engagement. Whether Trump's administration will heed this advice remains to be seen, but the outreach from Moscow and Ankara signals a clear desire for change. Both Russia and Turkey are positioning themselves as indispensable players in the region, ready to shape its future alongside or even in place of the US, depending on Washington's response. This moment presents an opportunity for the US to adopt a more nuanced, cooperative approach to the Middle East, one that recognizes the changing dynamics and acknowledges the roles of regional powers in charting a path toward stability.